Welcome, everyone. I'm Bill Hannafin. I'm the managing editor of The Wise Marketer, and we're here to continue our Loyalty Unstuck series, which today's topic is the intersection of loyalty data, privacy, and personalization. So I had a thought the other day, and you've probably heard this, that a lot of people will compare from time to time loyalty currency, points and miles, let's call it the equity that people accumulate within their loyalty programs. They'll compare that as almost being equivalent to a real currency. So we could call loyalty points and miles fiat currency, I guess. And I was reading some information from Visa where they were talking about stable coins, and they defined a stable coin as a type of blockchain-based token that was designed to maintain a stable value, typically pegged to a fiat currency. So it sounds a lot like loyalty points in a lot of ways. So if you accept that comparison, if you like that as a construct at all, then you can understand why loyalty currency and all the data, the consumer data that's associated with it in the databases that we accumulate, why it's become a really high value target for online fraudsters, for the online thieves, the bad guys out there, let's just say. So we've been thinking about this a lot, and thought about if we're on our way towards re-engineering loyalty as a business and getting to the next horizon of where the potential really lies, so we really need to be attentive to data. And so the inspiration for our conversation today, the intersection of this loyalty data, the privacy, the personalization. So we have brought together a really neat group of people. Our moderator today is Phil Rubin. He's the founder and CEO of Grace-Based Matters, which is recognized worldwide as a loyalty leader and trusted advisor for leading global brands. Phil is known to just about all of us. Phil, just saw you last week at an event. Good to see you again.
You too. Thanks, Bill. And all the
Good.
we're the good guys on this recording. So everybody.
Absolutely. That's right. And so the panelists that we've got, that Phil's going to moderate a discussion here. We've got Jody Daniels, who's CEO and founder of Red Clover Advisors. That's a privacy consultancy that helps companies simplify their data privacy practices, stay compliant, and build trust with customers. Hey, Jody.
Hi, glad to be here. I think I'm on the good side too, just saying.
I'm pretty sure we're all wearing the white hats today. So, and then we have two folks from Capillary, depending on which part of the world that you're speaking from. But Bill Swift serves as the chief technical architect at Capillary. And he previously served as CEO of Brierley through April 2023. Bill is also just a very well-known, well-respected personality within the business. So welcome this morning, Bill.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. And then he's joined by Piyush Kumar, who serves as Chief Technology Officer at Capillary, where he leads the company's technology strategy, product development, and engineering excellence initiatives. So we've got a great group together, and I'm gonna step back and listen, take some notes, hopefully come up with some good questions, but I'm gonna let Phil take it over and lead the conversation.
Thanks, Bill. And great to be with you all today. Thanks for doing this. I love this topic. I was really excited when Bill brought it up. And it made me think back to actually we were just talking about the fact that this topic of data and privacy isn't really talked about enough in the loyalty space. And we were fortunate enough to talk about it with Jody at Loyalty CXM, Loyalty Summit CXM this past February. And it's so important because at the heart of why we're all here and why we're all in the business that we're in, and when I say we, it's not just the five of us on this call, it's everybody tuning in who has an interest in customer loyalty. Back when our predecessors conceived frequent flyer programs, and I'm thinking in the modern stage of loyalty marketing, 79, 81, depending on your date, the proposition, the reason for doing all this was data collection and the ability to track customers and market to them directly. And the challenge back then, aside from the fact that systems, we weren't in this hyper connected world, which was in some ways probably made it easier for them from a data privacy and data security standpoint, but the cost of personalization was a lot higher because of computing power and because of CPMs. And so you either went mass market, but if you wanted to talk directly and leverage the data from the frequent flyer programs, back then you were just using direct mail and the CPM just for postage alone, depending on when you were in that, it was like $250 a thousand to $500 per thousand before getting into printing and distribution and fulfillment, all that business. So you had lesser challenges from a data security standpoint because they were more like transportation of data residing on these analog devices versus just people hacking in from the other side of the planet. Um, and it was sort of the premise, and was when Don Peppers and Martha Rogers wrote the One-to-One Future, which we're all still kind of waiting for from many brands. Um, but this goes also directly to this soapbox that I've been beating on for a little while now about how do we get loyalty unstuck, which is really, and we heard about this to your point last week at Loyalty Summit in Chicago, which was very travel focused. But one of the things that was one of the more consistent themes of the day and a half there was this enlightenment about personalization. And is it personalization because we all remember that's what customers want, or is it personalization to sell ads? But this is when we get into the tension between personalization, how much data is collected, how's the data used, how secure is it, how transparent is the data management, especially for the customers, especially where that is important still from a regulatory standpoint. And then the ultimate question when it comes to getting loyalty unstuck is where's leadership's head in this and what's their sense towards responsibility, regulation, compliance, and excellence from a technical architecture and operational standpoint. So that's probably more setup than anybody wanted to hear, but I think all those things are really important, and I think they're all going to come out in the conversation over the next half hour or so. So with that, why don't we get started? And Jody, I mentioned that you and I first connected in real life on this topic a few years ago, and you live this as a privacy expert and advisor on a daily basis. Not to mention the security side of that, which you also live on a daily basis because of where you work and live. What's your assessment of what's happening at this intersection of loyalty, privacy, and personalization? And do you think that it's getting better? Is it getting better for customers? Is it getting better for the enterprises who are responsible for the data and for that customer experience? And where's the
I,
struggle?
I think part of the struggle is that loyalty and marketing teams want to collect as much data as possible with the belief that they need to know so much about me to make sure that I am buying the products and services that they believe I need to have, and they want to make sure I'm getting the right products and services. And then we have laws and compliance that is telling us actually no, we want you to collect the least amount possible. In fancy privacy terms, it's called data minimization, meaning only collect what you actually need. And that makes a lot of sense from the risk point of view. We talk about security risk. Well, the more data that's collected, then the higher the risk. If something were to happen, now you have more data points about me, and bad actors have more data points that they can do something nefarious with all that information. Now, if we go back to what is the whole point of loyalty, it's to get me to feel more attached, more connected to a brand, to ultimately buy more things, whether I need them or not. But right, to stay connected to that brand. And I feel like part of it is the timing. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about kind of privacy by design, but it's also the what and when we're asking information. I recently was doing a lot of traveling. I bought a cup of coffee right away. My favorite story, because it continues to happen, is tell me your birth date. I'm not ready to give you my birth date. I just want to even taste the cup of coffee. I'm not ready to join you yet in that experience. And you could carry that through a variety of other other brands and experiences. It's about what data at what point makes sense to the relationship. And then we can start thinking about the secure aspects of it and risks and laws. But I just think we're still at a disconnect of what is the right information to collect at what time.
And there's so many answers to that. And so I obviously come at it from a what's great for the customer standpoint, and how do you balance that with what's great for the business? You're coming at it, can we call you a more orthodox privacy champion?
I haven't had that one before. I've had the cookie lady, but we can go with that. You can give me more nicknames.
And Bill Payush, you guys kind of sit in the middle here, right? Because you're trying to sort of negotiate with the client, with your clients, a number of different perspectives inside the enterprise to make whatever they want to collect, store, leverage, and maintain security of work for them. And you guys manage 1 billion customer records or so. So what is that, like a third of the planet? Um, how do you guys see it, and where do you guys see the tension and 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 also the case for data minimization?
I think part of the tension comes from that conflict that Jody called out early there. That, you know, in the CMO side of the equation, it's all about personalization, and the more profile information we have, the better. With that promise that they're going to use it appropriately. And then on the chief information security officer side of it, they're all about avoiding risk and data minimalization. And we get asked the question quite often: can we support this program without any personal information? And so then it kind of becomes our starting point of, if we just have somewhat behind the scenes customer key, if you will, then we can execute a lot of loyalty strategies with just that. But when we go through the requirements and the marketing teams in the room, and all these different use cases come up, it's really important then to kind of incrementally build on top of that. And if we can support it without additional data, then, and a lot of times we can, then we minimize the footprint there. But you know, eventually there's going to be some use cases that surface that you can't support unless you start collecting more and understanding like truly who the person is. But we have found that you can really power a lot of relevant experiences within loyalty and the communication strategy based on, I think, Jody, what you were getting at, the term I love to use is progressive profiling, collecting little bits of information over time and then reacting to that so that the consumer has a sense that you understand them, it's timely, and the next message or invitation to participate in a promotion that they get from the brand is relevant to the way they just answered those questions just recently. Becomes really powerful. So you don't have to get it all at once, and you can start with just the identity, if you will, and then kind of expand that, learning about their behavior and their desires and their preferences over time.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think, the differences between zero and first party data have a lot of implications. But the other big dynamic that I think about, and Piyush, I'd love to get you to comment on this, is, and we all see it, like there's no ubiquity, there's no homogeneity among how organizations approach this strategically and tactically in terms of collecting and using data, and trying to get a lot up front versus getting it over time. And this notion of progressive profiling sort of amplifies the fact that a lot of technology is built for these theoretical best practices that no one follows, that no one operates under. That's not fair, because there are companies that are close to best. But so, Piyush, how do you think about that from a tech standpoint? Because I mean, obviously you've got sort of the business policy questions, but you got to be able to make both of those, both ends and the middle of that spectrum work.
Yeah. And on this topic, what we have seen and based again on the learnings over many years now, Phil, that if the best practices sit in isolation, if the best practices are defined and designed without taking into account the enterprise use cases, the enterprise nuances of their systems, integrations, how they would want to build their use cases around it. And we all see that loyalty has expanded quite a bit into a lot of partnerships and so on. So the thing that we see and the perspective that we hold is that the best practices are very important. The best practices become your guiding principles of doing things. But we build those best practices keeping in mind the fact that there are enterprise use cases which will need to collect some data, which will need to use that data from a personalization perspective, from communications with the customers. There are times when they will need to work with partner businesses, partner brands in terms of providing combined experiences to the customers. So the way we see that is the best practices in the context of the enterprise use cases, and that is something that we have seen working very well. Obviously built with an understanding over many years of the fact that uh, enterprise use cases would not limit themselves to the best practices built in isolation. It's the best practices that have to evolve, uh, keep the privacy and security guidelines in mind, but factor in the use cases that will need to be served.
Jody, that's a perfect place for you to jump in because, you know, one part of the organization, best practices or use cases are an inherent conflict with the other. You know, among the most obvious being, you know, there's certain industries where rule number one is we don't want to get a letter from fill in the blank, like three-letter regulatory organization. You know, like if you're in healthcare, it's the FDA, right? Or if you're in the pharma business, it's the FDA. Uh, how do you see that playing out, especially because there have always been lawyers and liability, but and this isn't don't confine your answer to the legal liability, but this you're kind of plowing new ground for a lot of these organizations when you go in. And who drives that? And ultimately, how does it get reconciled? And that probably has a lot of variance from company to company.
For sure. I think it's first a cross-functional team, and that does vary by company. You might have legal, you might have privacy. Privacy could even sit not in legal. You might have compliance, and then of course you have the business side, and that might be marketing. That literally might be part of the business. Guest services, customer support. I mean, there's a variety of functions. Of course, security and maybe risk as well. And I think it's not that companies can't collect data and that they can't use data. It's about knowing what kind of data and then where the customers and individuals are located. That's going to determine a little bit more of the regulatory impact, whether that's healthcare, financial information, if the individuals are outside the US. So for example, if they're in the EU, what does that mean? That is different than what is here in the United States. And even in all those scenarios, it's not that you still can't have a program. It's about having a program that works from a regulatory and a risk point of view and meets what the customer is expecting. And I think that's a really important piece because privacy laws are here, quite honestly. Companies didn't do what they were supposed to. They pushed the envelope. They used data in ways that exceeded what a customer expected. And now we have rules. It's like in kindergarten, right? Someone did what they weren't supposed to do, and now everyone has to follow a certain rule and sit on the floor. Well, here, what is that rule and what makes sense for the business? What is okay to use? Maybe it's a very clear opt-in. When you give us this data, you get this in exchange. The California privacy law is all about transparency. It's about when you opt into this loyalty program, we're giving you this value exchange so that it's not a surprise to people. And then, as we've been talking about, the more you get to know someone, then the more data you can layer on. And that's where the business conversation needs to happen is what is that data? We want to stay out of the crosshairs of legal or compliance, but then we also want to think about, again, what is the customer expecting? What's okay to add? Is it my purchase history? Did I buy data? Am I following them around the internet and just putting signals together? What's going to not have me receive some kind of email, and Jody's very fancy word, have me scratch my head and say, where did you get that data from? The really creepy test. We don't want that because that is the complete opposite of what we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, so really quick follow-up for you, and then Bill Paish, I want you guys to comment on that, both in terms of what you're seeing, because you're seeing maybe it's a similar but different cross-section of enterprise. The quick question for you, Jody, is when you go in and you're working with clients, are you seeing a pattern in terms of a movement towards the customer, like towards what's better for the customer, towards more transparency, as all the regulation was intended to accomplish? Or is it just the opposite because people are cautious for all kinds of, I mean, I've literally had clients say, I'm uncomfortable with customer data and relationship management.
Right.
Um,
I think it matters on the industry and the company. Those that are a bit more in the regulated space, those health, those financial companies, they tend to be much more risk averse and how their data is going to be used and potentially commingled. Otherwise, I see companies moving more towards what is in the best interest of the customer because they're recognizing that that is actually what yields the open rates. That's what yields the conversion. And then they're also able to emphasize the overall risk and benefit to the company. I mean, the reality of even having significant data, there's a cost to actually housing all of that data. Multiple systems, there's an operational cost to having that. And then just the band-aid complexity of legacy systems attempting to talk to each other, which doesn't always work. I do see a movement to actually trying to make this customer focused in a regulated environment that still meets the business needs. And there's tension. That's not I can say that easily. It doesn't mean we sat in a room and in 4 seconds we're able to solve that. There's hard conversations that are happening with the right stakeholders at the table, having the discussion of, okay, so if I want this data, where does it get stored? And is that in a secure fashion that isn't commingled with this over here? What does the opt-in experience look like? Does that meet an appropriate regulatory or just clear, not dark pattern, but yet will also convert? And I had a good customer UX experience in that situation. All of those are the conversations that I'm seeing, really the forward thinking and really care about the consumer companies having.
So when you said all that, I started smiling when you're describing the light bulbs going off that these companies realize, oh, this is actually good for the customers and it's good for the business. And then the cost of making that all happen, I was smiling because that's obviously that's why the capillaries of the world exist. So that's a good time to segue to Bill and Paish to comment about that, because to Jody's point, there is a cost to getting to that place where the data is properly managed, secure, and usable, to create value. So how does that look on the tech side? I mean,
think
obviously
part of-
similar conversations because you got the variable by industry and regulate the regulatory variable as well. But
Yeah, and we do have clients in almost every vertical industry, so that's a good call out because the sensitivities are definitely different in healthcare than they might be in retail. But one thing that conversation triggered for me is that this was part of our Brierley heritage now that's part of Capillary, is that our strategists will help our clients define what that core value proposition is in the very beginning. So working closely with the marketing team and it doesn't, and that's kind of the entry point. That's the value that you're going to, the consumer is going to consciously opt in exchange for their identity and probably minimal personal information. They're going to feel the benefits and of the program itself. So that core value proposition is really key. And a lot of times our companies helps our clients understand what that is. And then they kind of transition from there into more engagement and experiential and ultimately trying to create this emotional bond between the consumer and the brand. So there's a marketing strategy side of it that's important. But I think that the key thing that we've always done is that it's really important to have that marketing team in the same room as the security people, the enterprise architects. And we always have this kind of elaborate solution architecture kind of diagram on the board that really clearly calls out system responsibilities, data flows, the information that we are going to collect. Usually the reason why we're collecting it is kind of part of the diagram because we're referring to use cases that certain aspects of the systems integration are going to support. So when you have the marketing team and the tech teams kind of working together, then they can make those conscious trade-offs in some cases on what's really important to enable that customer experience at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Just
I
to
think
add
that's such
to
an sorry, Piyush. Go
No, no,
ahead.
no, I was just going to add to what Bill said is we have seen them manifest in ways where for a very large conglomerate, we run the entire loyalty program with a PIA-less architecture. So, so the risk as seen and perceived by the risk and the security team uh, was minimized because from the loyalty system perspective, it's anonymized customers, but you are still being able to capture, let's say, some of their preferences, some of their other information, but you do not really know who individually these are, and you are working with federated identities, federated authentication. So so just adding to what Bill said, getting uh, the marketing people, so people with different concerns in the same room, while defining some of these use cases and how some of these things will get accomplished, has been very helpful.
Yeah, I mean I don't think people it's the notion or the term integration is not just a technical term. Integration really needs to be sort of integrated from an enterprise and a cross-functional standpoint, which isn't a new idea, but it is one of those things that helps you answer the question and get to solutions where you've got sort of PII-less data structures for the most part. If we went back 10 years, 15 years, there's a whole set of categories of data that we didn't contemplate that we now have to account for. I mean, just thinking about like changes from an advertising standpoint. I think that's important because we're seeing certainly within travel, certainly within airlines, this big push for them to be more every bit as much of a publisher, which is sort of the next evolution of how do you sell your currency? How do you monetize your data? Why don't we take this last little round and let's talk about why don't you guys, from each of your perspectives, address where you think this is going in terms of data that exists today, and as you're especially from a capillary standpoint, but also Jody, I think from a policy management and regulatory standpoint, the new types of data that we're gonna be faced to managing with. I mean, one is obviously like partners and strategic partners, which is not a new thing, but there's probably more data being multi-housed than before. But how do you guys think about that, and maybe sort of wrap up with what you think the two or three big things coming down the road that we need to start thinking about in this area are?
I'll start. I think if I refer to some of the movement of privacy laws and how they're defining data, sensitive data, for example, has a much broader definition than I think many people are used to. Many people might think sensitive is a social or a date of birth or even financial information, and that might be a good idea. However, sensitive can include things like religion, political views. In some states, health is much broader than what is classically considered PHI under HIPAA. It's a really very broad definition, kind of depending on the state. So, and then of course we have kids data. When we start to think about the kinds of data that you have and how you might piece some of that together, it's going to be really important to understand your customers, your jurisdictions that you're in, and the kind of data that you're collecting and how you're putting any of that together. And then of course we have digital data, because nowadays all the clicks that I have, all of how that's getting put together is considered personal information these days under these different privacy laws. Again, it's not that you can't do it, it's just how you're executing that. So for me, the future is going to be, I loved this idea of integration and having marketing with the security teams. And I'm going to suggest also with the privacy teams and with the legal teams. Almost every project always has finance considered, IT considered, hopefully you have legal considered from a contract point of view. Privacy needs to be at the conversation at the beginning. For me, this privacy by design. It's thinking of all the parameters that are critical to a successful launch and sustainability and minimizing any kind of privacy risk.
It's great. Bill, Piyush, who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll go.
Go ahead, Bill.
You mentioned a few things, Phil, and I think there's this partner ecosystem, and you mentioned media and advertising and monetization a little bit. I think that's it's something that we're definitely focused on. I think there's and done right, it just feels a lot of these programs have 50 to 100 million people participating in them. And from a loyalty perspective, a lot about that customer base. And but there is, especially in travel and in certain verticals, there's a very large partner ecosystem that would love to tap into that membership base. And I think if done correctly, there's ways to, I guess you could use the term monetization from a brand perspective, but it's I think it's just the power of that somewhat captive audience. If a member of the program sees again that value proposition, and they're going to earn, say, loyalty currency for engaging with a message or an advertisement potentially from a partner, then the consumer, they're making a choice to participate. They're getting a benefit from that participation. The brand is getting maybe more tightly connected with their partners, and they're really building out that ecosystem, as in travel, for example, across the airlines, hotels, auto rental. There's a certain group of partners that just logically fit together, and they share a lot of customers. So I think if done appropriately with the right opt-ins in front of it and the value proposition for the partner, the brand, and the consumer, becomes a really powerful triangle, if you will, to pull those things together. And you can do that, partner kind of targeting and segmentation and audience building, if you will, without knowing much personal information. It goes back to our conversation about progressive profiling. You know what they're interested in. They've told you. So there's zero-party data that needs to be leveraged to be able to make the messaging relevant.
Not to mention if you have a payments partner, then you're really uh, you're really
Acquisition, credit card,
the,
right?
the trifecta. Piyush, sorry, your turn, please.
So I think one of the things in the next immediate few years that is going to be I'm going to talk about AI a little bit because I think it will in some ways in the initial days create more tensions. It create more worries in some ways, but I think if we use it right, one of the things that I think is that it will potentially be able to reduce the need to capture a lot. One of the needs, I think, to capture a lot of information has also been necessitated by the fact that the ability to predict some of those would have actually been poor. Um, they don't yield good results, so businesses and marketers tend to capture a lot, obviously far more accuracy. I think the advancements in AI, if they are able to bring uh, the quality of some of the derived information to a much better quality level, then collecting some of this information, the need could potentially be reduced on some of those from a customer perspective. Yeah.
I love that comment for two reasons. Number one, we would all be failures if we recorded this discussion and the term AI didn't come up. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding about that part. But I think I love your point about how early we are relative to the potential, especially the potential for really good results from AI. Keeping that in mind, I mean, that's where the transformation will happen. And you're right. And you bring up an example that I saw not too long ago, being essentially a small business owner, and somebody had a question about my web hosting or something. So I go to my web hosting provider, and it rendered the name of my company Grayscape Matters, which got me really concerned that somebody got, and this actually relates to the topic. My first thought was, did somebody get in, steal my domain, and change the name? But when in reality, it was AI rendering it on their site saying, do you want to work on Grayscape Matters today? And when I called them, they were totally unable to explain to me what happened until I got to like a third level technical person, tech support person who said, yeah, that's probably it. And it was so new to them. They were clueless about how to do that, which is so I totally agree with you. That's a great point, and what a perfect way to sort of wrap this up. I'll add three quick things of my own before I express my thanks to everybody. That example that I mentioned with my web hosting provider goes back to why are we all here to begin with? And that is because if you trust a brand, you're willing to share your data, be tracked by them because they're promising you that they're going to make your world a little bit better. They're not saying let us invade your privacy. It's for your own good. Trust us, because we've all learned that lesson. So that's number one. Is I think we're going to have to move, particularly in an environment so permeated with AI, to where brand trust in order to win and to be a leader in this area, you're going to have, you can have the best technology, the best policies, even the best integration, but if you don't have the brand trust, I think you're sort of back to zero on that. Um, the second thought I have is there's a great song written 50 some years ago by the Rolling Stones called Fingerprint File, where they sing, these days it's all secrecy and no privacy. I won't try to sing that. And the last is just this notion that like and you guys heard me say this when we were talking, and I've shared this before, the idea that personalization and relevance aren't the same. And what customers really want is relevance, and that doesn't necessarily require outrageous amounts of, if any, PII beyond the addressability. And so this notion that personalization doesn't mean relevance, but relevance is always felt personally by the customer. And I think bring this back to the idea of how do we all work so that loyalty doesn't get stuck for brands and enterprises. This is a hugely important conversation, and I'm really grateful to everybody on the call. Bill for organizing this, Jody for joining us and lending us your expertise, Bill and Payush for your support of the industry and Wise Marketer and getting Loyalty Unstuck, and just for your thoughts today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bill with the heartfelt thanks to everybody here, and obviously everybody who's tuning in to listen, because this was a fun conversation. I think a really important conversation for people in the industry and brands especially.
It's really good. Thanks, Phil. I mean, I really felt like just listening to this, it was an important topic that we covered today, and I'm grateful that we dedicated the time and talked it through. And so again, yeah, thanks to Jody and to Bill and to Payush and Phil, especially you, for having the inspiration about Loyalty Unstuck and for, partnering with us on this series. But I would tell everybody that's listening, if you're wondering where do we go from here, there's always that so what? What are we going to do next? What are we going to do about this? How do we make it better? And one of the things it could be, just propose the idea that we could be planting seeds for something that could become an industry group. If we could be so bold, that might establish common thought and language around this topic, and that we could somehow establish our industry with people just like we have here today as the go-to source of authoritative information that regulators, lobbyists, and legislators would depend on. So when they're trying to form a vision for the future, they would actually come to this group. They would come to people like we have here. And I mean, the EU just adopted a new data act this month. And so the regulators aren't sitting still, and so neither should we. So I would say if anybody's interested in that concept, to please contact us here at the Wise Marketer. And otherwise, I just want to thank again all of you so much for just for your time and efforts to crack open this topic about loyalty data, privacy, and personalization. We'll see you back here next time.
Thanks, everybody.
We enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.